In a world that's increasingly bizarre, one question remains. What's really going on? Join us on The Daily Absurd as we delve into the strange corners of reality, exploring the stories that make you scratch your head and say, is this real life?
Ever heard of a war sparked by a severed ear? Sounds crazy, right?
Crazy but true. The War of Jenkins Ear is a wild story.
So a British captain, his ear gets lopped off by the Spanish, and boom, war?
Not quite that simple, but the ear certainly became a potent symbol, yeah.
Intriguing. Let's unravel this historical oddity. So this Captain Jenkins, what exactly happened to him?
Allegedly, Spanish Coast Guards boarded his ship, accused him of smuggling, and when they found nothing, they got violent. One officer supposedly sliced off his ear.
Brutal. And this happened years before the actual war started?
Exactly, 1731. The incident didn't gain traction politically until much later, you know?
So what else was fueling this conflict? It wasn't just about a missing ear, was it?
Nope. There were long-standing trade disputes. The Spanish wanted back payments from British merchants, and the British were furious about Spanish reflections on their Caribbean trade. It was a mess.
A perfect storm of economic grievances.
Precisely. Jenkins' ear became a symbol of Spanish aggression, a rallying cry, yeah.
So Jenkins actually testified before Parliament?
He did, in 1738. Legend says he even brought the ear in a jar.
Wow, that's quite a visual. And that was enough to push Britain to war?
It helped. The story inflamed public opinion, and Britain declared war on Spain in October 1739. It was a big deal.
Where did most of the fighting take place?
Primarily in the Caribbean, but it also spilled over into North America, particularly between Georgia and Spanish Florida.
And how did the British fare?
They had some early successes, like the capture of Portobello, but ultimately the war was a stalemate. A bit of a draw, really.
Tell me more about the fighting in Georgia and Florida.
Georgia's founder, James Oglethorpe, led attacks on Spanish forts in Florida. The Spanish retaliated, invading Georgia.
And how did that go for them?
Not well. The British won key battles like Gully Hole Creek and Bloody Marsh, repelling the Spanish invasion, a decisive victory for the British.
Any standout figures in this conflict?
Oglethorpe on the British side, and Don Blas de Lezo, the Spanish commander at Cartagena, who employed a brilliant defensive strategy. A really smart guy.
So a mix of military prowess and strategic brilliance.
Exactly. The war highlighted the importance of both offensive and defensive strategies.
The War of Jenkins Ear didn't exist in a vacuum, did it?
No, it became entangled with the larger War of the Austrian Succession. It was a complicated time.
And how did it all end?
With the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, a status quo antebellum, essentially things went back to how they were before the war. No real winners.
So what's the lasting impact of this seemingly bizarre conflict?
It solidified British control in some areas, shaped the Georgia-Florida border, and provided valuable experience for British and American colonial forces. It was important, even if it seems strange.
A significant stepping stone in the larger colonial conflicts.
Absolutely. It foreshadowed future battles and power struggles in the Americas.
I read about Fort Mose, a Spanish fort in Florida. What was its significance?
It was a unique settlement of escaped slaves who were granted freedom by the Spanish in exchange for military service. A really interesting story.
A fascinating aspect of the war, highlighting the complex dynamics of slavery and colonial power.
Indeed. It shows the multifaceted nature of the conflict.
There's mention of a loose connection to the Stoner Rebellion. Can you elaborate?
Spain offered freedom to slaves who escaped to Fort Mose. Some historians believe the Stoner Rebellion participants aimed to reach it. It's a theory, but an interesting one.
So the war intersected with the ongoing struggle for freedom among enslaved people.
Exactly. It adds another layer to the complexity of the era.
What happened to Captain Jenkins after all this?
He faded from history after the war. Ironically, the war that bears his name largely overshadowed his own story. A bit sad, really.
A fittingly ironic end to this unusual tale. So the War of Jenkins Ear, a conflict born from a severed ear, yet encompassing broader economic and political tensions. Quite a story.
A reminder that history is often more complex and fascinating than we initially imagine.
That was a great discussion. Thanks for sharing your insights.
Thanks for listening to The Daily Absurd. If you enjoyed the ride, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the absurdity. See you next time.